The Carpenter and the Spy, Chapter 1, Dust and Distance. The December sun was already sinking toward the pine trees when Joe Martinez locked up his workshop for the last time before Christmas. He ran his hand along the workbench one final time, feeling the grain of the wood beneath decades of use, the small imperfections that made it his. Sawdust hung in the amber light slanting through the window, turning the air golden. 29 years old, and this workshop was the thing he was proudest of in the world. That probably said something about his life, but Joe tried not to think too hard about what. His phone buzzed in his pocket. Maria. His sister's name lit up the screen along with her smiling face from last Easter. "Tell me you're already on the road," she said before he could even say hello. "I'm locking up now. I'll be there by." "Joe, it's a 16-hour drive to Crescent City. If you leave now, you won't get here until tomorrow afternoon, on Christmas Eve. You promised you'd help Marcus set up the lights." Joe glanced at his truck, already packed with his duffel bag and the carefully wrapped presents he'd spent the last 3 evenings making. A jewelry box for Maria, carved from Texas walnut. A toy truck for his nephew, complete with tiny working doors. A spice rack for Marcus, though his brother-in-law probably would have preferred something from Amazon. "I'm walking to the truck right now," Joe said, pulling the workshop door closed and testing the lock. "I'll drive straight through. Maybe stop once for gas and coffee. You'll stop and sleep. I don't want my only brother falling asleep at the wheel because he's too stubborn to get a motel room." "Yes, ma'am." Joe smiled despite himself. Maria had been bossing him around since she was 6 and he was 4. 25 years hadn't changed that dynamic. "And Joe?" Her voice softened. "I'm really glad you're coming. It's been too long." It had been. Almost 2 years since he'd seen his sister in person. She'd moved to California with Marcus 5 years ago, chasing some dream of coastal living and better opportunities. Joe had stayed in Nacogdoches, taken over their father's carpentry business, and tried to convince himself that he was exactly where he wanted to be. "Me too," he said. "See you tomorrow." He ended the call and stood for a moment in the gravel driveway, looking at the small building that had been his whole world for the past 5 years. His father had built it in 1987. Back when Nacogdoches was even smaller than it was now. Joe could still remember being 7 years old, handing his dad nails, learning that everything worth doing was worth doing right. His dad had been gone 3 years now. Heart attack in this very workshop, surrounded by the smell of wood and the tools he'd loved. Sometimes Joe still expected to see him standing at the bench, measuring twice and cutting once, humming old country songs under his breath. "Merry Christmas, Dad," Joe said quietly to the empty air. Then he climbed into his truck and pointed it west. The drive through East Texas was familiar territory. Joe had driven these roads his whole life, knew every town, every roadside barbecue joint, every shortcut. He stopped once in Shreveport for gas and a burger that tasted like cardboard, then pushed on through the night. He dated a girl once, 3 years back, who told him he lacked ambition. Sarah. She'd wanted him to expand the business, hire employees, franchise it maybe, turn it into something bigger. When he'd explained that he liked the work, liked doing it with his own hands, liked knowing every piece he made would outlive him, she'd looked at him like he'd said he wanted to be a failure. They'd broken up 2 weeks later. She was in Dallas now, doing something with marketing. She posted pictures on social media of fancy restaurants and business conferences. She looked happy. Good for her. Joe didn't regret staying small, he just regretted staying alone. The thought came unbidden, as Louisiana turned into Texas, turned into Louisiana again, as the hours blurred together and the coffee wore off and the road became a ribbon of headlights and darkness. He was going to spend Christmas with his sister's family, would be the bachelor uncle making toys and fixing whatever Marcus couldn't fix, and then he'd drive home to his empty house and his workshop and another year exactly like the last one. "Sometimes the best things in life happen when you're not looking for them," Maria had told him on the phone last week. "You just have to be open to the unexpected." Easy for her to say. She'd found Marcus in college, married him at 23, had a kid by 25. Her life had unfolded like it was supposed to. Joe's life had unfolded like a road map that kept folding back on itself. He crossed into Arkansas around midnight, Louisiana at 2 in the morning, Texas again at 4. The sun came up somewhere in West Texas, turning the flat landscape pink and gold. Joe stopped at a truck stop for breakfast and more coffee, sat at the counter next to men who looked as tired as he felt, men driving toward something, or away from something, or just driving because that's what you did. By noon he was in New Mexico. By 3 he was in Arizona. By the time the sun started setting again, he was in California, watching the landscape change from desert to mountains to forest. He called Maria from a gas station in Redding. "I'm about 4 hours out," he said. "I'll be there by 9, maybe 10. "Just get here safe," she said. "The lights can wait until tomorrow. Marcus already fell off the ladder once. I told him you'd handle it. Tell him I said he's getting too old to be climbing ladders. He's 32. Like I said, too old." Maria laughed, and Joe felt something in his chest loosen. This was good. This was right. He needed this break, needed to see his family, needed to remember there was more to life than sawdust and silence. He got back on the road as the last light faded from the sky. Highway 101 hugged the coast, winding through redwood forests that rose like cathedral walls on either side. Joe had never been this far north in California before. It was beautiful in a way that was almost overwhelming, ancient and wild, and nothing like the gentle pine forests of East Texas. He was 60 miles outside Crescent City when his truck started making a sound it definitely shouldn't make. A grinding, metallic protest that came from somewhere deep in the engine. Joe eased off the gas, his heart sinking. The sound got worse. He pulled onto the shoulder, turned off the engine, and sat in the sudden silence. "No," he said to the steering wheel. "Not now. Not here." He tried turning it over again. The engine cranked but wouldn't catch. The grinding sound turned into a death rattle. Joe got out and popped the hood, though he already knew what he'd find. Steam rose from the engine block. Even in the dim light from his phone's flashlight, he could see the problem. The timing belt had snapped, probably taken out the water pump with it. This wasn't a roadside fix. This was a tow truck and a mechanic and at least 2 days of work. He pulled out his phone, 1 bar of service. He Googled "mechanic near me" and got 3 results, all in Crescent City. All closed. It was December 23rd, 7:30 at night. Nobody was answering. He called Maria. "Please tell me you're not calling to say you'll be late," she said. "I'm calling to say my truck died, about an hour south of you, timing belt." Silence. Then, "Can you get it towed?" "Not tonight. Maybe not tomorrow either. It's Christmas Eve. Everyone's closed or booked." "So what are you going to do?" Joe looked up and down the empty highway. Fog was starting to roll in from the ocean, turning the redwoods into shadows. "I'm going to call a tow truck, get them to take me and the truck into Crescent City, find a motel, and wait until someone can fix it." "Joe, I'm so sorry. This was supposed to be—" "It's fine," he said, and surprised himself by meaning it. "It's just a truck. It can be fixed. I'll get there when I get there. Let me know where you end up. We'll come get you if we need to." "Don't. You've got Marcus and the kid and Christmas to deal with. I'm fine. I'll see you in a few days." He ended the call and stood there for a moment, breathing in the cold Pacific air, listening to the distant sound of waves he couldn't see. The fog was getting thicker, wrapping around him like something alive. This was not how this trip was supposed to go. But there was something almost peaceful about it, standing here in the middle of nowhere with a broken truck and no plan. For the first time in miles, Joe wasn't thinking about the past or worrying about the future. He was just here. In this moment, in this fog, in this strange and beautiful place he'd never been before. Sometimes the best things in life happen when you're not looking for them. He shook his head, smiled at himself, and pulled up the number for a tow truck. An hour later, his truck was being hauled into Crescent City, and Joe was sitting in the cab of the tow truck next to a man named Dale, who had opinions about everything from the weather to the government to the best way to smoke a brisket. "You'll want the Lighthouse Inn," Dale said as they pulled into town. "Only place with vacancy this time of year. Everything else is booked with tourists coming to see the redwoods. Owner's a good guy, Bert. He'll treat you right." "Appreciate it," Joe said. "Mechanic won't be able to look at your truck until the day after Christmas at the earliest," Dale continued. "Maybe the 27th. Everyone's backed up." You picked a hell of a time to break down. Wasn't really planning on it. Dale laughed. Nobody ever does. But hey, worse places to be stuck than Crescent City. It's a nice little town. Good food, good people, ocean right there. Make the most of it. The Lighthouse Inn was exactly what it sounded like. A small motel with a faded lighthouse painted on the sign, perched on a cliff overlooking the Pacific. The fog was so thick Joe could barely see the ocean, but he could hear it, a constant rhythmic thunder that made him feel very small and very far from home. He checked in at the office, where a man who must have been Bert gave him a key to room 7 and told him breakfast was included and the coffee pot was always on in the office. Truck trouble? Bert asked. That obvious? Dale only does tow jobs this time of night. You're stuck here for a few days, I reckon. Looks that way. Bert studied him for a moment. You seem like a good sort. You need anything while you're here, you let me know. We take care of people in Crescent City. Thank you, Joe said, meaning it. Room 7 was small but clean, with a bed, a TV, a tiny bathroom, and a window that looked out at nothing but fog. Joe dropped his duffel on the bed and stood at the window for a long time, listening to the ocean, feeling the weight of the day settle into his bones. He should have been in his sister's guest room right now, drinking beer with Marcus, planning tomorrow's ladder work. Instead, he was in a motel room in a town he'd never heard of until 3 hours ago, stuck until at least the day after Christmas. He pulled out his phone to text Maria, and that's when he saw it. The coffee station Bert had mentioned was in a little covered area between the office and the rooms, and standing there, pouring herself a cup, was a woman. Even through the fog and the dim light, Joe could tell she was beautiful. Dark hair, athletic build, graceful even in the simple act of adding cream to her coffee. She wore jeans and a dark sweater, and something about the way she moved made Joe think of a dancer, or a fighter, or both. She looked up, and for just a moment, their eyes met through the window. Joe felt something shift in his chest, something he hadn't felt in a long time. Then she looked away, picked up her coffee, and disappeared into the fog toward one of the other rooms. Joe stood at the window for another minute, then shook his head. He was tired, seeing things, reading too much into a stranger, getting coffee. He texted Maria that he was settled in for the night, set an alarm for tomorrow, and climbed into bed. The ocean kept him company, a constant presence just beyond the fog, and somewhere in that rhythm, Joe fell asleep. He didn't know that in room 12, Tanya Rodriguez was standing at her own window, thinking about the man she'd just seen. The one with the kind eyes and the carpenter's hands and the sadness around his edges that matched her own. She didn't know his name yet. Didn't know he'd just driven 16 hours for family. Didn't know that his truck breaking down in this specific town at this specific time was about to change both of their lives forever. All she knew was that tomorrow she had a job to do. A man to kill. Another mission in a long line of missions that had hollowed her out until she barely recognized herself. She finished her coffee and checked her weapon one more time. Tomorrow, she told herself. After tomorrow, she could disappear again. She had no idea how right she was, or how wrong. Chapter 2. Coffee and Collisions. Joe woke to the sound of seagulls and realized he'd forgotten to close the curtains. Gray morning light filled the room, and when he looked out the window, the fog had lifted just enough to reveal the ocean, a vast expanse of steel-colored water stretching to the horizon. It was Christmas Eve. He checked his phone. A text from Maria. Merry Christmas Eve. How's the motel? Clean. Quiet. Can hear the ocean from my room, he typed back. Bert says no mechanic until the 26th at earliest. So you're stuck there for Christmas? Looks that way. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Finally, I'm so sorry, Joe. This sucks. It's okay, he wrote and realized he meant it. I've got a warm bed and breakfast included. Could be worse. Call me later. Love you. Love you too. Joe showered and dressed, then remembered Bert's offer of coffee. The little covered area between the office and the rooms had a coffee maker, a mini fridge, and a few small tables with chairs. It was early, barely 7, but the coffee was already fresh. Joe poured himself a cup and stood looking out at the ocean. The motel sat on a cliff, and below he could see rocks and tide pools and a narrow beach. A few hardy souls were already out walking, bundled against the cold. Beautiful, isn't it? Joe turned. The woman from last night stood a few feet away, holding an empty mug. Up close, she was even more striking than he'd thought. Dark hair pulled back in a ponytail, brown eyes that seemed to take in everything, high cheekbones and a mouth that looked like it didn't smile often but probably should. "Yeah," Joe said. "Never seen the Pacific before." "First time in California?" She moved past him to the coffee maker, and Joe caught a hint of something. Not perfume, just clean soap and shampoo. "First time this far north. I'm from Texas. Long way from home." She poured her coffee with economical movements, nothing wasted. "What brings you to Crescent City?" "Broken truck," Joe said, then smiled ruefully. "I was heading to my sister's place for Christmas. Made it about 60 miles short." Something shifted in her expression. Not quite sympathy, but something close. "That's rough, especially on Christmas Eve. Could be worse. Could be stuck somewhere without ocean views and free coffee." He raised his mug in a small toast. She almost smiled. Almost. True enough. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, both looking out at the water. Joe knew he should probably go back to his room, stop bothering this woman with small talk, but something kept him rooted to the spot. "I'm Joe," he said finally. "Joe Martinez." She hesitated for just a fraction of a second. "Tanya." "Nice to meet you, Tanya." He waited to see if she'd offer a last name. She didn't. "You here for the holidays too?" "Work," she said, and her voice had a finality to it that suggested the subject was closed. "On Christmas Eve? That's dedication." Something like that. Another silence, this one less comfortable. Joe was about to make his excuses and leave when Tanya spoke again. "What do you do in Texas?" "I'm a carpenter. Custom furniture, cabinets, repairs, anything wood-related, basically." Now she did look at him, really look at him, her eyes dropping to his hands. Joe was suddenly aware of the calluses on his palms, the small scar on his left thumb from a chisel that had slipped 2 years ago, the rough edges that no amount of washing could quite smooth. "You make things with your hands," she said. It wasn't quite a question. "Yeah, I know it's not very impressive, but I like it. There's something satisfying about taking raw materials and turning them into something useful. Something that'll last." "I think that's very impressive," Tanya said quietly. Joe felt warmth spread through his chest that had nothing to do with the coffee. "Thanks." She looked back at the ocean, and Joe saw something pass across her face, something that looked almost like longing. "I don't make anything," she said. "I mostly just unmake things." It was an odd way to phrase it, but before Joe could ask what she meant, Bert emerged from the office. "Morning, folks. Merry Christmas Eve." He was carrying a toolbox and looked harried. "Joe, glad I caught you. You wouldn't happen to be handy with plumbing, would you?" "Depends on the problem. Toilet in room 4 won't stop running. I've tried everything I know, which admittedly isn't much. Was about to call a plumber, but they'll charge triple on Christmas Eve, and I'd rather not if I can help it." Joe set down his coffee. "I can take a look. No promises, but I've fixed a few toilets in my time." "You're a lifesaver. Come on, I'll show you." Joe glanced at Tanya. "Nice talking to you." "You too," she said, and Joe could have sworn there was something wistful in her voice. Room 4's toilet was a mess. The flapper was broken, the fill valve was ancient, and the float mechanism looked like it predated color television. Joe sent Bert to the hardware store with a list of parts, then spent the next hour taking the entire mechanism apart and putting it back together properly. When he tested it, the toilet filled smoothly and shut off right where it was supposed to. No running, no leaking, no constant water sounds. "You're a miracle worker," Bert said when he came back to check. "How much do I owe you?" "Nothing, just the cost of the parts." "Joe, you just saved me $200 in plumber fees. Then buy me breakfast sometime this week. We'll call it even." Bert shook his head, smiling. "Breakfast is already included, but I'll tell you what. You eat free while you're here, and if you need anything at all, you just ask." "I appreciate that." Joe washed his hands and headed back to his room. As he passed the coffee station, he saw Tanya sitting at one of the small tables, laptop open in front of her. She was staring at the screen with an intensity that made Joe think of a hawk watching a field mouse. She looked up as he passed, and for a moment their eyes met again. "Fix the toilet?" she asked. "Yeah, wasn't too bad, just old parts." "You just saw a problem and fixed it." That's kind of my thing. Joe shrugged. I like fixing things. Tanya studied him for a long moment. That must be nice, to build things, to fix things, to make the world a little better just by being in it. There was something in her voice that made Joe's chest tighten, a sadness he recognized because he'd felt it himself. The loneliness of going through life feeling like you weren't quite making the impact you should. You hungry? The words were out before Joe could think better of them. I saw a diner down the road. My treat. To thank you for the conversation. I haven't talked to anyone but tow truck drivers in about 18 hours. Tanya looked at him for a long moment. Joe could see her weighing it, see the war behind her eyes. She should say no. He knew she should say no. Whatever she was here for, whoever she was clearly someone who kept to herself. Okay, she said finally. Give me 10 minutes to change. Meet you at my truck, Joe said, then remembered. Oh, right. Broken truck. Meet you here, I guess. We can walk. Tanya almost smiled again. We can take my rental. I'll drive. The Coastal Kitchen was exactly what it sounded like, a small diner with checkered floors, vinyl booths, and a waitress named Doris who called everyone honey, and poured coffee like she was being paid by the gallon. Joe ordered pancakes and bacon. Tanya ordered an egg white omelet with vegetables and dry toast. Watching your figure? Joe asked, then immediately regretted it. Sorry, that came out wrong. I have to stay in shape for work, Tanya said without offense. Occupational requirement. What kind of work requires? Joe stopped. Sorry, you said you didn't want to talk about work. I didn't say that, I just didn't elaborate. She took a sip of her coffee. Let's just say I work for the government and leave it at that. Fair enough. Joe wondered what kind of government work required staying in fighting shape but didn't require an office or acknowledgement of Christmas. Must be important to have you working on Christmas Eve. Everything I do is important, Tanya said. Or at least that's what they tell me. But you're not sure. She looked at him sharply, and Joe worried he'd overstepped. But then her expression softened. I used to be sure. Now I'm just doing the job. I know that feeling, Joe said. Some days I wake up and think, is this it? Is this all I'm going to do? Make cabinets and fix toilets until I'm 60? But you said you like what you do. I do. I just wonder sometimes if liking it is enough, if I should want more. More what? Joe thought about it. I don't know. More impact? More significance? My ex-girlfriend used to say I lacked ambition. Ambition is overrated, Tanya said. Most ambitious people I know are miserable. Are you ambitious? I used to be. She looked out the window at the gray morning. I used to think if I just worked hard enough, climbed high enough, proved myself enough, I'd feel satisfied, fulfilled. But the higher you climb, the more you realize the view is just the same, only lonelier. Joe felt something click into place. This woman, whoever she was as lost as he was. Maybe more lost. She just hid it better. So what brings you joy? He asked. If not work? Tanya was quiet for so long, Joe thought she wasn't going to answer. I honestly don't know, she said finally. It's been so long since I did something just because it made me happy. I'm not sure I'd recognize joy if it hit me in the face. That's the saddest thing I've heard in a while. Yeah, Tanya said, it kind of is. The food arrived, and they ate in silence for a few minutes. Joe watched Tanya cut her omelet into precise pieces, eat with careful deliberation. Everything about her was controlled, measured, like she was afraid of what might happen if she let go. You want to know what brings me joy? Joe asked. Tanya looked up. What? Finding a piece of wood with a beautiful grain, the smell of fresh sawdust, the moment when you finish something and step back and think, yeah, that's exactly what it should be. Small things, quiet things, nothing that's going to change the world. I think small things change the world more than we realize, Tanya said. Yeah? Yeah, big things, wars, politics, technology, they're loud. They get all the attention. But small things, small kindnesses, small moments of beauty, small acts of creation, those are what make life worth living. Those are what actually matter to the people living it. Joe felt like he'd been punched in the chest, in a good way. That's exactly it. Tanya smiled. A real smile this time, and it transformed her face completely. See? You're doing important work. You're just not getting credit for it. Neither are you, I'm guessing. The smile faded. No, definitely not. They finished breakfast, and Joe insisted on paying despite Tanya's protests. As they walked back to her rental car, Joe felt lighter than he had in months, maybe years. This woman, this stranger, understood something about him that even his own family didn't quite get. "Want to walk on the beach?" The words came out before Joe could stop them. "I mean, I've never seen the Pacific. Seems like I should at least touch it while I'm here." Tanya checked her watch. Joe saw something pass across her face. Calculation, debate, decision. "Okay," she said, "but just for a little while. I really do have work." They drove back to the Lighthouse Inn and found a narrow trail that led down the cliff to the beach. The tide was out, revealing tide pools full of starfish and anemones and small crabs scuttling between rocks. Joe crouched next to a pool, fascinated. "Look at this. It's like a whole world in miniature." Tanya knelt beside him. Their shoulders almost touched. "I've never really looked at a tide pool before," she admitted. "You're kidding? You work on the coast and you've never looked at tide pools?" "I don't usually have time to look at anything." Joe dipped his fingers in the cold water, watched a tiny fish dart away. "That's a shame. Some of the best things in life are the things you take time to actually see." He looked up and found Tanya watching him instead of the tide pool. Their faces were inches apart. Joe could see flecks of gold in her brown eyes, could see the way her breath caught slightly. "What?" he asked. "Nothing," she said quietly. "You're just different." "Different how?" "Different from anyone I've ever met." Before Joe could respond, Tanya stood abruptly. "We should get back. I really do need to work." They walked back up the trail in silence, but it was a different kind of silence now. Charged, aware. Joe was hyper-conscious of every time their hands almost brushed, every time Tanya glanced at him when she thought he wasn't looking. At the motel, Tanya pulled into a parking spot and turned off the engine. "Thank you," she said, "for breakfast. And the tide pools. I needed that." "Me too." She looked at him, and Joe saw the war in her eyes again. Want versus duty, connection versus safety. "I have to work tonight," she said. "Tomorrow too, probably. I won't be around much." "That's okay. I'll probably just read and watch TV anyway. Not much else to do with a broken truck." "Right." Tanya opened her door, then hesitated. "But maybe, if you're still here in a couple days, we could get breakfast again?" Joy bloomed in Joe's chest. "I'd like that." "Okay?" She smiled that real smile again. "Okay, good." She got out of the car and walked toward her room. Joe watched her go, watched the way she moved, the way she held herself, like someone carrying a weight no one else could see. He went to his own room and lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about brown eyes and sad smiles and the feeling that something important had just happened. In room 12, Tanya stood at her window, watching the man from Texas disappear into room 7. She should be reviewing her target's schedule, should be checking her equipment, should be focused on the job. Instead, she was thinking about tide pools and pancakes and the way Joe looked at the world like it was full of small wonders worth noticing. She pulled out her phone and dialed her handler. "Status?" he answered. "Target is confirmed. I'll move tonight." "Any complications?" Tanya looked at room 7. "No," she lied. "No complications." She ended the call and checked her weapon one more time. Tonight. She'd finish this tonight. And then maybe, just maybe, she could have breakfast with Joe one more time before she disappeared back into the shadows where she belonged. It was the best plan she had. It was also the last plan she'd make before everything changed. Chapter 3. The Weight of What We Carry. Joe spent the afternoon walking through Crescent City, exploring the small downtown with its mix of tourist shops and practical businesses that served the locals. He bought postcards for Maria's kid, found a bookstore where he picked up a thriller he'd never read, and grabbed a sandwich from a place called the Harbor Deli. The town was charming in an unpretentious way. No corporate chains, no manufactured quaintness, just a real place where real people lived and worked and raised families. Joe found himself thinking he could live somewhere like this. Open a small workshop, fix things for people, watch the ocean every morning. Of course, he'd thought the same thing about Nacogdoches, and he'd still ended up lonely. He texted Maria a photo of the harbor. Not a bad place to be stuck. "Making the best of it?" she wrote back. "Trying to." "Meet anyone interesting?" Joe hesitated, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. "Maybe," he finally typed. Three dots appeared immediately. Tell me everything. Nothing to tell yet. Just met someone. Probably nothing. But maybe something? Maybe. I'm proud of you for putting yourself out there, even if it's accidental. Joe smiled. Love you, sis. Love you too. Merry Christmas Eve. By the time Joe got back to the motel, the sun was setting, painting the fog orange and pink. He made himself some coffee and sat at one of the small tables, watching the light fade and the darkness settle over the ocean. He kept glancing at room 12. Tanya's rental car was gone. She was out there somewhere, doing whatever mysterious government work required her to miss Christmas with her family. If she even had family. She'd never mentioned anyone. Joe wondered what it would be like to live the way she seemed to. Alone, secretive, always working. He wondered what would drive a person to choose that life. Or if anyone actually chose it, or if it just happened, one decision at a time, until you looked up and realized you'd built walls so high you couldn't see over them anymore. He was still sitting there when his phone rang. Unknown number. Hello? Mr. Martinez? This is Chuck from Chuck's Auto Repair. Bert from the lighthouse gave me your number. Said you had a truck with a blown timing belt? That's right. I had a cancellation tomorrow. Guy decided to wait until after New Year's. If you can get your truck to my shop by 8 a.m., I can probably have it done by end of day on the 26th, day after Christmas. Joe sat up straighter. Seriously? Seriously. It's overtime for my guys, but we're already going to be there anyway. Might as well keep busy. That would be amazing. Thank you. Bert says you fixed his toilet. We take care of each other around here. See you at 8. Joe ended the call and sat back, smiling. 2 days instead of 4 or 5. He'd still miss Christmas with Maria, but he could be there by the 27th. He should have felt relieved. Instead, he felt a strange pang of disappointment. 2 days meant less time in Crescent City, less time to explore, less time to maybe see Tanya again. You just met her, he told himself. Get a grip. But he couldn't shake the feeling that something important was happening here. Something he didn't want to walk away from quite yet. The temperature dropped as night fell. Joe went back to his room, turned on the TV, and tried to focus on a basketball game. His mind kept wandering, kept thinking about brown eyes and controlled movements and the sadness hidden behind professional competence. Around 9, he heard a car pull into the parking lot. He looked out the window and saw Tanya's rental. She got out, looking exhausted, and headed toward her room without glancing around. Joe almost went out to say hello, almost asked if she wanted coffee or just to talk. But something about the set of her shoulders, the way she moved, told him she needed to be alone right now. He went back to the basketball game and tried not to think about her. In room 12, Tanya sat on the edge of the bed and stared at her hands. They were shaking. She'd been doing this job for 6 years. 23 confirmed eliminations. She'd never hesitated, never faltered, never felt anything but grim satisfaction at a job well done. Tonight, she'd tracked her target to a seafood restaurant on the waterfront. Dmitry Volkov, arms dealer, seller of secrets, supplier to terrorists and dictators. A man whose death would save countless lives. A man who deserved what was coming to him. She'd followed him to the bathroom, had the syringe ready, a quick injection, fast-acting poison that would mimic a heart attack. Clean, professional, untraceable. She'd been 3 feet away when her phone buzzed in her pocket. She'd ignored it, stayed focused, moved closer. It buzzed again. Volkov had turned, seen her, smiled. "Merry Christmas," he'd said in his thick Russian accent, then walked past her back into the restaurant. Tanya had stood there, frozen, the syringe burning a hole in her pocket. She'd pulled out her phone. 2 texts, both from the same unknown number. "This is Joe. Bert gave me your number. Hope that's okay. Just wanted to say thank you for today. Made being stuck here a lot better." She'd stared at those messages for a full minute. Then she'd watched Volkov leave the restaurant with his security detail, climb into his armored car, and drive away. Her first blown assignment in 6 years. Because of 2 text messages from a carpenter from Texas. Now she sat in her motel room, hands shaking, phone in her lap, and tried to understand what the hell had just happened to her. She should call her handler, report that the target had changed his routine, that she'd need another opportunity. Buy herself time to figure this out. Instead, she looked at Joe's messages and typed, "It's okay. Thank you for the texts. Today was good." She hit send before she could second-guess herself. 3 dots appeared almost immediately. Can't sleep? Work ran late. You? Watching basketball. Not really watching, if I'm honest. Just thinking. About what? About how weird life is. How you can plan everything perfectly and then one broken truck changes everything. Tanya felt something twist in her chest. Yeah, I know that feeling. You sound tired. Why? Long day. Want to talk about it? She should say no. Should put down the phone and plan her next move on Volkov. Should remember who she was and what she did and why people like her didn't get to have conversations about nothing with Carpenters from Texas. Yes, she typed instead. But not about work. About anything but work. Deal. Question. If you could be anywhere right now, where would you be? Tanya thought about it. A year ago, she would have said New York, her apartment, her gym, her routine. Now those places felt like cells. Honestly, right here. This isn't a bad place to be. Even working on Christmas Eve? Even then, I thought I wanted to be at my sister's. Now I'm not so sure. I think maybe I needed this. Time away. Time to think. Time to figure out what I actually want. What do you want? Another long pause. I want to matter. I want to build something that lasts. I want to wake up looking forward to the day instead of just going through the motions. And I want to find someone who sees me. Actually sees me. Not who they want me to be or who I should be. Just me. Tanya stared at the message, feeling tears prick at her eyes. When was the last time someone had actually seen her? Not Agent Rodriguez. Not Asset 7734. Not the ghost. Just Tanya, just the woman. That's not too much to ask, she typed. Feels like it sometimes. I know. What about you? What do you want? Tanya looked around her sterile motel room, at her go-bag in the corner, packed and ready, at her laptop with its encrypted files, at her weapon on the nightstand, at the life she'd built that looked like success but felt like prison. I want to stop running, she typed, surprised by her own honesty. I want to find something worth staying for. She stared at the message for a long time before hitting send. Joe's response came quickly. I hope you find it. Me too. Merry Christmas, Tanya. Merry Christmas, Joe. She put down her phone and lay back on the bed. Through the wall, she could hear the faint sound of Joe's TV. It was oddly comforting, knowing he was right there. Knowing she wasn't completely alone. Her phone buzzed with a new message. Her handler. Status update required. Tanya turned off her phone and closed her eyes. Tomorrow, she told herself. She'd figure it out tomorrow. Joe woke early on Christmas morning to find a text from Tanya, sent at 6:47 a.m. Coffee? He smiled and typed back, already putting the pot on. Meet you there in 5? When he got to the coffee station, Tanya was already there, wearing running clothes and looking like she'd been up for hours. She was stretching against one of the tables, and Joe tried not to notice how graceful she looked. Morning, he said. Merry Christmas. Merry Christmas. She straightened and smiled at him, and Joe's heart did something complicated in his chest. I went for a run. Thought I'd burn off some energy before breakfast. How far? 10 miles. Joe blinked. 10 miles? On Christmas morning? I like to run. Helps me think. She poured them both coffee. What about you? What's your vice? I build things in my workshop until 2 a.m. and forget to eat. Workaholic? Says the woman who ran 10 miles before 7 a.m. on Christmas. Tanya laughed, and the sound was so genuine and unguarded that Joe felt like he'd won something. Fair point. They sat at one of the tables, watching the sunrise turn the ocean from gray to gold. A few other motel guests were starting to emerge. Families with kids excited about presents, couples in matching pajamas. Did you have traditions? Joe asked. Growing up? Christmas traditions? Tanya was quiet for a moment. My mom used to make tamales. Every Christmas Eve the whole family would help. My grandmother, my aunts, my cousins, everyone had a job. I was in charge of spreading the masa. She smiled at the memory. I was terrible at it, too impatient, but my grandmother would just laugh and fix what I'd messed up. That sounds nice. It was. The smile faded. She died when I was 16. My mom died 2 years later. After that, Christmas was just another day. I'm sorry. Tanya shrugged, but Joe could see the old pain there. It was a long time ago. What about you? My dad used to take me and Maria to cut down a tree. Real tree from the woods. He said artificial trees were for people who didn't appreciate the smell of pine. Joe smiled. We'd spend Christmas Eve decorating it and Christmas Day building whatever gifts he'd made us. He always made something. One year he built me a desk. Another year, a bookshelf shaped like a rocket ship. He taught you to build. Yeah, everything I know, I learned from him. Joe took a sip of coffee. He'd liked you, I think. Why? Because you see things. Most people just look at surfaces. You pay attention to what's underneath. Tanya met his eyes. So do you. They sat in comfortable silence, drinking coffee as the sun climbed higher. Bert emerged from the office and waved at them. Merry Christmas, you two. There's pastries in the office if you want breakfast. Danish, muffins, the works. You didn't have to do that, Joe called back. It's Christmas. Of course I did. Bert disappeared back inside. Joe and Tanya looked at each other and laughed. Want to grab some pastries and eat on the beach? Joe asked. Tanya checked her watch. That quick gesture Joe was starting to recognize. The mental calculation of duty versus desire. Yes, she said, let's do that. They loaded up a small bag with pastries and fresh coffee, then took the trail down to the beach. The tide was in, but there was still a narrow strip of sand where they could walk. Joe found a piece of driftwood and turned it over in his hands. Look at this grain. See how it curves? This was probably part of a branch that grew twisted, maybe from wind or the way other trees crowded it, but that twisting made it beautiful. Tanya watched him trace the lines of the wood. You really do see beauty in everything. Not everything, but most things, yeah. He set down the wood. I think that's the carpenter in me. Wood has a story. It grew from a seed, weathered storms, maybe got struck by lightning or chewed on by insects. Every imperfection is part of its history. You can either sand all that away and make it look new, or you can honor what it's been through and let that be part of what makes it special. I wish more people thought about humans that way, Tanya said softly. What do you mean? Everyone wants to sand away the imperfections, make people into what they're supposed to be, instead of accepting what they are. The scars, the twists, the damage, we're taught to hide all that. Pretend we're perfect. Joe looked at her. Really looked at her. I don't think you're perfect. I think you're carrying something heavy and it's wearing you down. But I also think that weight is part of your story, and your story makes you who you are. And who you are is pretty damn compelling. Tanya's eyes widened. For a moment, Joe thought he'd gone too far, said too much too soon. Then she kissed him. It was quick, almost tentative, just a brush of her lips against his. But it sent electricity through Joe's entire body. She pulled back, looking almost shocked at herself. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have. Joe cupped her face in his hand and kissed her back. Slowly this time, deeply, with all the feeling that had been building since he first saw her at the coffee station. Tanya melted into him, her hands coming up to grip his jacket, and Joe felt like the world had narrowed to just this moment, this woman, this perfect, impossible connection. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathing hard. Wow, Joe said. Yeah, Tanya whispered. Wow. They stood there, foreheads touching, neither wanting to be the first to step away. I don't know what I'm doing, Tanya said. I don't do this. Me neither, but it feels right. It feels terrifying, that too. Joe smiled and kissed her forehead. We don't have to figure it all out right now. We can just be. See what happens? Tanya nodded against his chest. Okay. Yeah. They walked back up the beach, hand in hand, and Joe felt like he was walking on air. This was crazy. He'd known this woman for less than 24 hours. She was secretive and complicated and clearly carrying demons he couldn't begin to understand. And he was completely, utterly falling for her. They spent the rest of Christmas Day together. They drove up the coast, stopped at scenic viewpoints, ate lunch at a tiny cafe that was miraculously open. Tanya told him about growing up in New York, about her grandmother's accent and her mother's cooking and the streets she used to walk. Joe told her about Nacogdoches, about his workshop, about the peace he found in creating things with his hands. They didn't talk about her job. They didn't talk about the future. They just existed in the present, in this bubble, where nothing else mattered. As the sun set, they sat in Tanya's rental car at a viewpoint watching the ocean turn purple and gold. I don't want this day to end, Joe said quietly. Me neither. But it has to. Yeah. Tanya took his hand. Joe, there's something I need to tell you. His heart sank. Here it comes, he thought. The complication. The reason this can't work. I'm not a good person, Tanya said. The things I do for work, they're not good things. I've done things I can't take back, things that keep me up at night. We've all done things we regret. Not like this. She looked at him and her eyes were full of pain. If you really knew me, knew what I've done, you wouldn't be sitting here holding my hand. Joe thought about it for a long moment. You want to know what I think? What? I think you judge yourself harder than anyone else ever could. I think whatever you've done because you thought it was right at the time, or necessary, or because you didn't have a choice. I think you're carrying guilt that's eating you alive. And I think that guilt means you're a better person than you believe you are. Tanya's eyes filled with tears. How can you say that? You don't even know. I know enough. I know you're kind. I know you're thoughtful. I know you run 10 miles on Christmas morning and text to thank someone for breakfast and look at the world like it hurts to be in it. That's not a bad person, Tanya. That's someone who's been hurt and is trying to survive. A tear slid down her cheek. Joe wiped it away with his thumb. I'm going to screw this up, she whispered. I'm going to hurt you. Maybe, or maybe we'll figure it out together. He kissed her gently. I'm willing to take that chance if you are. Tanya kissed him back, desperate and grateful and terrified all at once. They drove back to the motel as night fell. In the parking lot, neither wanted to say goodbye. Tomorrow I have to work, Tanya said. For real this time, I can't put it off anymore. I understand, but maybe, after, we could have dinner? I'd like that. She kissed him one more time, then pulled away before either of them could change their minds. Good night, Joe. Good night, Tanya. Joe watched her walk to her room, watched her door close behind her. Then he went to his own room and lay awake for hours, thinking about everything and nothing, feeling more alive than he had in years. In room 12, Tanya sat on the floor with her back against the door and cried. Not because she was sad, because for the first time and longer than she could remember, she was happy. And happiness was the most dangerous thing she'd ever felt. Tomorrow she would finish the job, would complete the mission she'd let slip away, would be the professional she was trained to be. But tonight, just for tonight, she let herself be the woman Joe thought she was, the woman who might deserve a second chance, the woman who might deserve love. Chapter 4. When Worlds Collide. Joe woke on December 26th to his phone buzzing. Chuck from the auto shop. Got good news for you, Mr. Martinez. Your truck's ready. Timing belt, water pump, and I went ahead and replaced a few hoses that looked questionable. She'll run smooth for another 100,000 miles. Joe sat up, rubbing sleep from his eyes. Already? I thought you said end of day. My guys worked fast. You can pick her up any time after noon. That's great. Thank you. Joe ended the call and stared at his phone. His truck was ready. He could leave. Could drive to Maria's, spend a few days with his sister, then head back to Texas and his workshop and his regular life. The thought made him feel hollow. He looked out the window at room 12. Tanya's rental car was gone. She'd left early, probably before sunrise, off to do whatever mysterious work she'd been putting off. Joe showered and dressed, then sat on the edge of his bed, trying to figure out what he was feeling. Relief? Disappointment? Both? He'd known this was temporary. A few stolen days with a woman who was clearly passing through his life. They hadn't made promises, hadn't talked about the future. Hell, they'd barely talked about the present. But last night, holding her hand, kissing her, feeling like maybe he'd found something real that had felt like more than temporary. His phone buzzed with a text from Maria. Any update on the truck? Ready to pick up this afternoon. So you'll be here tonight? Joe hesitated. Maybe tomorrow. There's something I need to take care of first. Something or someone? Maybe both. Be careful, little brother. Don't fall too fast. Too late, he typed, then deleted it. Instead, I'm always careful. Since when? Joe smiled despite himself. Fair point. Love you too. He grabbed coffee from the station and sat watching the ocean, waiting. For what? He wasn't entirely sure. A sign? A message from Tanya? Some clarity about what the hell he was supposed to do next? Around 10, Bert came out of the office. Heard your truck's ready? You heading out today? Maybe. Haven't decided yet. Bert sat down across from him, coffee in hand. Can I give you some unsolicited advice? Sure. That woman in room 12, Tanya, I've run this motel for 20 years. I've seen a lot of people come through, and I've gotten pretty good at reading them. He took a sip of coffee. She's running from something, or toward something. Maybe both. And you're a good man, Joe. The kind who fixes things. The kind who wants to help. I sense a but coming. But some people don't want to be fixed. Some people are too broken or too complicated or too deep in whatever trouble they're in, and sometimes the best thing you can do is let them go. Joe thought about Tanya's tears last night. The way she'd said, "I'm going to hurt you," like it was inevitable. What if I don't want to let her go? Then you're braver than most, or more foolish. Sometimes it's hard to tell the difference. Bert stood and patted Joe's shoulder. Whatever you decide, I hope it works out. You both deserve some happiness. Joe spent the rest of the morning walking aimlessly through town, thinking. He found himself at the harbor, watching fishing boats come and go, trying to imagine a life where he didn't wake up wondering what Tanya was doing. If she was okay, if she was thinking about him too. He couldn't imagine it. In less than 3 days, she'd gotten under his skin in a way no one else ever had. His phone buzzed. Unknown number, but he knew before he looked. Can we talk? Not tonight, now. It's important. Joe's heart started racing. Where? The viewpoint where we watched the sunset. Please hurry. Tanya's hands were shaking again. She'd spent the morning tracking Volkov, waiting for her opportunity. He'd gone to a meeting at a warehouse on the industrial edge of town, the perfect place for an accident. Isolated, easy access and egress, no witnesses. She'd followed him inside, staying in the shadows, syringe ready. This time she wouldn't hesitate. This time she'd do her job. Volkov had been talking to another man, someone Tanya didn't recognize. They were discussing a shipment. Weapons bound for somewhere in Africa, the usual evil that men like Volkov trafficked in. Tanya had moved closer, silent as smoke. Then Volkov's phone had rung. He'd answered, listened, then laughed. I understand. New Year's Eve in San Francisco. I will be there. He'd ended the call and turned to his companion. Change of plans. We leave tonight. This town is too small, too boring. I want to celebrate the new year properly. Tanya had frozen. Tonight. He was leaving tonight. If she didn't act now, he'd disappear, and she'd have to track him down all over again in a major city where he'd be even more protected. She'd stepped forward, ready to make her move. And then she'd thought about Joe, about the way he looked at driftwood and saw beauty, about the way he'd wiped away her tears, about the way he'd said, "I'm willing to take that chance if you are." She'd thought about what would happen after she killed Volkov. She'd disappear, move on to the next assignment, never see Joe again, go back to being alone in her empty apartment, carrying the weight of another death, another piece of her humanity chipped away. Or she could make a different choice. She'd watched Volkov leave the warehouse, climb into his armored car, and drive away. For the second time in her career, she'd let a target walk. And this time, it was a conscious choice. Now she sat at the viewpoint, watching for Joe's truck, trying to figure out how to explain what she'd done, what she was about to do. Her phone rang, her handler. "Tell me you have good news," he said. "Target is leaving Crescent City tonight, heading to San Francisco for New Year's." Silence. Then, "And you're letting him go." It wasn't a question. He knew. "I can track him to San Francisco, complete the mission there." "Rodriguez." Her handler's voice was cold. "We've been over this. You're compromised. You've been in Crescent City for 3 days with a simple target, and you've found 2 excuses not to complete the assignment. This isn't like you, so I'm going to ask you one time, what's going on?" Tanya closed her eyes. "I need out." "Out? Out of this. The missions, the killing, all of it. I'm done." More silence, longer this time. When her handler spoke again, his voice was soft, dangerous. "You know there's no out, Tanya. You know too much. You've done too much. The only way out is in a box." "Then I guess we have a problem." "No, you have a problem, and here's how we're going to solve it." She could hear him typing. "There's a high-value target in Prague. Very high value, very high risk. The kind of job that needs our best operator. I'm not going to Prague." "Yes, you are. Because if you don't, if you walk away from this, we'll have to assume you've turned, that you're a threat. And you know what we do with threats." Tanya's blood ran cold. "You'd come after me. We'd come after anyone you've been in contact with. Anyone who might have turned you. Anyone who might know our secrets." A pause. I hear Crescent City is a nice town, small, quiet. Be a shame if something happened to disturb that peace. Joe, he was threatening Joe. Leave him out of this, Tanya said, her voice shaking. He doesn't know anything. He's just what? Just someone you've been spending time with? Someone who's made you forget your duty? Her handler's voice hardened. Here's the deal, Rodriguez. You take the Prague job, you complete it, you come back and we evaluate whether you're still fit for service. Or you walk away, and we clean up your mess. Your choice. The line went dead. Tanya sat there, phone in hand, feeling her world crumble around her. She'd known this would happen. Had known the moment she let Volkov walk the first time that there would be consequences. But she'd hoped, foolishly, desperately hoped, that somehow it would work out. That she could just walk away. Start over. Be the person Joe saw when he looked at her. She should have known better. A truck pulled into the viewpoint parking area. Joe's truck, freshly repaired. He climbed out, concern written all over his face, and Tanya felt her heart break. She'd done this to him. Put him in danger just by existing in his orbit. The only way to keep him safe was to let him go. Joe knew something was wrong the moment he saw Tanya's face. She was sitting on a bench overlooking the ocean, and she looked like she'd aged 10 years since last night. Her eyes were red, her hands were clenched in her lap. Hey, he said softly, sitting beside her. What's going on? I have to leave, Tanya said. Tonight. There's a job. In Europe. I have to go. Joe felt his stomach drop. For how long? I don't know. She looked at him, and he saw everything in her eyes. The pain, the fear, the goodbye. Maybe a long time. Maybe I won't come back. What are you talking about? Tanya, what's happening? She took his hand, and hers was trembling. I told you I wasn't a good person. I told you I'd done things I can't take back. I meant it, Joe. The work I do, it's not desk work. It's not paperwork. I hurt people. I end people. That's what I am. That's what I do. Joe's mind raced, trying to process what she was saying. You're… what? Some kind of spy? Assassin? Something like that. She laughed bitterly. I can't give you details, can't tell you specifics, but you need to understand that being around me is dangerous. My job is dangerous. The people I work for are dangerous, and I've put you at risk just by spending time with you. I don't care about the risk. You should. You should care. You should run as far from me as you can and never look back. Tears were streaming down her face now. But I'm selfish, Joe. I'm so selfish that even knowing I should walk away, even knowing I'm gonna hurt you, I can't stand the thought of never seeing you again. Joe pulled her close, felt her shake against him. Then don't go. Stay here. Quit your job. We'll figure something out. It's not that simple. Why not? Because they don't let people like me quit, because I know too much. Because the only way out is… She stopped herself. Is what? Tanya pulled back, wiped her eyes. I have to take this job. I have to go to Prague and do what they're asking me to do. If I don't, they'll come after me, and they'll come after anyone I care about. Understanding crashed over Joe. They threatened me. Not explicitly. But the implication was clear. Do the job or they clean up my mess, and you're part of my mess now. She touched his face. I'm so sorry. I should never have let this happen. Should never have had coffee with you that first morning. Should never have. Joe kissed her, hard and desperate and full of everything he couldn't put into words. When they broke apart, he said, I'm not sorry. Not for 1 second of it. And I'm not afraid of your people or your job or whatever danger you think I'm in. Joe, how long do we have before you leave? Tanya checked her watch. My flight's at 8. I need to be at the airport by 6. Joe looked at his own watch. It was just after 2. 4 hours. 4 hours to figure out how to save this, how to save her. Okay, he said. Here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna spend the next 4 hours together, and we're gonna figure out a plan. There is no plan. This is what I'm trying to tell you. There's no way out. There's always a way out. You just have to be willing to take it. He stood, pulled her to her feet. Come on, where are we going? My truck? We're going to drive, and we're going to think, and we're going to find a solution. Because I didn't drive 16 hours and break down in the exact right place at the exact right time to meet you just to let you disappear. Despite everything, Tanya smiled. You really think the universe brought us together? I think broken trucks and missed missions and Christmas in a motel might mean something. Yeah. He opened the passenger door of his truck for her. "Get in." She hesitated for just a moment, then she climbed in. Joe drove north, up the coast, past towering redwoods and dramatic cliffs. They didn't talk about her job or Prague or the people who wanted her to complete impossible missions. They talked about small things, favorite movies, best meals they'd ever eaten, places they'd always wanted to visit but never had. Tanya told him about a grandmother who'd taught her to dance, about summers in the Bronx where fire hydrants became swimming pools and the whole neighborhood was family. Joe told her about his father's hands, always scarred and calloused, but somehow gentle when they needed to be. About the desk his father had built him, which he still used in his workshop. They stopped at a beach and walked along the sand. The sun was getting lower now, painting everything gold. "I have insurance," Tanya said suddenly. Joe looked at her. "What?" "Information. Evidence. Things I've collected over the years. Illegal operations, black budget programs, things the agency doesn't want public." She picked up a shell, turned it over in her hands. "I kept it all as a safety net, in case I ever needed leverage." "Would it be enough? To make them leave you alone?" "I don't know. Maybe. Or maybe it would just make me an even bigger target." She threw the shell into the waves. "But I could release it, burn the whole operation down, take them down with me." "And then what?" "And then I'd be a traitor, a fugitive, always looking over my shoulder, always running." She looked at him. "Is that a life you'd want? Because if I do this, if I walk away, you'd be part of it. They'd come after you too. We'd both be running." Joe thought about his workshop, his house, the quiet life he'd built in Nacogdoches, everything he'd ever known. Then he thought about going back to that life without Tanya. Going back to fixing cabinets and eating alone and wondering what might have been if he'd been brave enough to take the chance. "I fix things for a living," he said. "I'm not fancy. I'm not exciting. I'm just a guy who works with his hands and tries to make things a little better than he found them." He took her hands in his. "But I'm also a guy who's been lonely for a long time, who's been going through the motions and calling it a life. And then I met you, and for the first time in years, I felt awake. I felt like I mattered, like the world was bigger and more complicated and more beautiful than I'd been letting myself see." "Joe, I'm not done. You think you're going to hurt me? You think running would be hard? Maybe. Probably. But you know what would hurt more? Watching you get on that plane, wondering for the rest of my life if you made it back from Prague. Living every day knowing I let you go because I was too afraid to take the risk." He pulled her close. "I'm not afraid, Tanya, or maybe I am, but I'm more afraid of losing you than I am of anything else." Tanya buried her face in his chest. "This is crazy. Yeah, we barely know each other. I know enough. You could die. They could kill us both. We're all going to die eventually. At least this way I'll die having lived." She laughed and cried at the same time. "How are you real? I've been asking myself the same thing about you." They stood there as the sun sank lower, as the waves crashed against the shore, as the impossible decision loomed over them. Finally, Tanya pulled back. "If we do this, if we really do this, we have to be smart. We have to plan. We can't just run blind." "Okay, so let's plan. I'll need to get my insurance files. They're encrypted, stored in multiple locations. I'll need to contact a journalist I trust, someone who won't be intimidated by the agency. We'll need new identities, cash, a way to disappear. I've got some money saved, not a lot, but enough to get us started, and I can work anywhere. Carpentry's carpentry. We'd have to leave tonight. Right now. Can't go to Prague, can't give them any warning, just disappear." Joe thought about Maria, about never seeing his sister again, at least not for a long time, about leaving his workshop, his father's tools, everything he'd built. Then he thought about Tanya's smile, about the way she'd looked at him on the beach, about the possibility of building something new, something that mattered, with someone who saw him for who he really was. "Let's do it," he said. "Just like that, just like that." Tanya stared at him for a long moment. Then she kissed him, deep and desperate and grateful. Okay. We need to move fast, pack light, get cash, ditch our phones once we're clear of the area." "Where do we go?" "South. Mexico first, then further. I have contacts, people who owe me favors. We disappear for a while, let the heat die down, then release the evidence from somewhere they can't trace. They drove back to the motel in silence, both processing what they just decided. The enormity of it, the impossibility of it, the rightness of it. At the Lighthouse Inn, they packed quickly. Joe threw clothes and essentials into his duffel, grabbed the presents he'd made for Maria and her family. He'd mail them somehow, later, when it was safe. Tanya emerged from her room with a single backpack and a determined expression. "Ready?" she asked. "One thing first." Joe walked to the office. Bert looked up from his computer. "Heading out?" "Yeah, I wanted to thank you for everything. You've been kind." "My pleasure, Joe. You fixed my toilet. We're even." Bert studied him. "You okay? You look like a man about to do something drastic." "Maybe I am." Joe smiled. "But for the first time in a long time, I feel like I'm doing the right thing." Bert nodded slowly. "The woman in room 12? Yeah. She worth it?" "More than worth it." "Then good luck. And Joe?" Bert stood and shook his hand. "If you ever need a place to lie low for a while, you remember Crescent City. We take care of our own here." "Thank you." Joe walked back to his truck where Tanya was waiting. They climbed in, and Joe started the engine. "Last chance to change your mind," Tanya said. "I'm not changing my mind. This is going to be hard. Dangerous. We might not make it." Joe reached over and took her hand. "Then we won't make it together." "That's better than the alternative." Tanya smiled, a real, genuine, hope-filled smile. "Let's go." Joe put the truck in gear and pulled onto Highway 101, heading south. Away from his sister, away from his workshop, away from everything he'd ever known, toward something new, something terrifying, something beautiful. Tanya pulled out her phone, typed a quick message, then powered it down and removed the battery. "What did you send?" Joe asked. "Just a message to my handler. Told him I quit, told him if anyone comes after us, the evidence goes public immediately." She rolled down the window and threw the phone pieces into the darkness. "No going back now." "No going back," Joe agreed. They drove through the night, the headlights carving a path through the darkness, the future uncertain but theirs to shape. Behind them, in a windowless office in Virginia, an alert went off. Asset 7734 had gone dark, disappeared, turned traitor. The machinery of the agency ground into motion. Hunters deployed, protocols activated, the chase had begun. But for now, in the warm cab of a carpenter's truck, Joe and Tanya drove south toward Mexico, toward freedom, toward a future they'd build together one day at a time. And for the first time in 6 years, Tanya Rodriguez wasn't running from something. She was running toward it. Chapter 5. The First Mile. They crossed the California-Mexico border at Tijuana just before midnight. Joe's hands were white-knuckled on the steering wheel, but the border guards barely glanced at their IDs before waving them through. "That was easier than I expected," Joe said once they were clear. "It always is going south," Tanya said. "Coming back would be the problem, but we're not coming back." The finality of those words hung in the air. Joe thought about Maria, probably sitting down to a late dinner right now, wondering why he hadn't called. He'd send her a message somehow, eventually, let her know he was okay, but he couldn't tell her where he was or why he'd disappeared. The less she knew, the safer she'd be. "You okay?" Tanya asked. "Yeah, just thinking about my sister. She's going to worry." "I'm sorry." "Don't be. I made this choice. I'd make it again." He glanced at her. "What about you? Anyone you're leaving behind?" "No one who will miss me. That's part of the job. You don't get to have people who matter. Makes you too vulnerable." She paused. "Or at least that's what they told us." Turns out they were right. They drove through Tijuana and kept going south, through Rosarito and Ensenada, putting miles between themselves and the border. Around 3 a.m., Tanya had Joe pull into a truck stop. "We need to ditch the truck," she said. Joe's heart sank. "Why?" "Because it's registered in your name. They'll be tracking it. We need something they can't trace." "Where are we going to get another vehicle at 3 in the morning?" Tanya smiled grimly. "You'd be surprised what you can accomplish with cash and the right approach." "Wait here." She disappeared into the truck stop. Joe sat in the cab, exhaustion pulling at him, adrenaline still making his heart race. What the hell was he doing? 48 hours ago, he'd been a carpenter from Texas heading to his sister's for Christmas. Now he was a fugitive in Mexico with a woman he'd known for 3 days. It should have felt crazy, reckless, wrong. Instead, it felt like the first honest thing he'd done in years. Tanya returned 20 minutes later with a man in his 50s who looked like he'd seen everything and been impressed by none of it. They walked to a dusty Ford F-150 parked at the edge of the lot. $3,000 American, the man said. Cash, no paperwork. $2,000, Tanya countered. And you forget you saw us. The man studied her, seemed to recognize something in her eyes. $2,500, and I was never here. Deal. Tanya counted out the cash. Joe transferred their bags to the new truck. The man handed over keys and walked away without another word. How did you? Joe started. Don't ask questions you don't want answered. Tanya climbed into the driver's seat. Get some sleep. I'll drive for a while. Joe wanted to argue, wanted to insist he could keep going. But exhaustion won. He reclined the passenger seat and closed his eyes. He woke to sunlight and the smell of coffee. They were parked at a small roadside cafe, and Tanya was sitting on the hood of the truck, 2 cups of coffee beside her, watching the sun rise over the desert. Joe climbed out, joints stiff from sleeping in the truck. How long was I out? 5 hours. We're about 60 miles outside Mexicali. She handed him a coffee. I got you a breakfast burrito, too. It's in the truck. Joe sat beside her on the hood, sipping the coffee. It was terrible and wonderful at the same time. Did you sleep at all? I'll sleep later. Too wired right now. She looked at him and there was something uncertain in her expression. You having second thoughts? No. You? Every 5 minutes. She smiled weakly. But then I look at you and remember why I'm doing this and the thoughts go away. We're going to be okay, Joe said, hoping he sounded more confident than he felt. You don't know that? No, but I believe it anyway. They ate breakfast watching the sun climb higher, turning the desert gold and red and orange. A truck hauling produce rumbled past, a family in a station wagon, an old man on a motorcycle. All of them going about their lives, unaware that the 2 people sitting on the hood of a dusty truck had just thrown everything away for each other. Where are we heading? Joe asked. I have a contact in Guadalajara, former CIA, burned by the agency same way I'm about to be. He owes me a favor. He can help us get new identities, set up accounts they can't trace. Tanya drained her coffee. From there, we go further south, Central America, maybe South America. Somewhere we can disappear while I figure out how to release the evidence without getting us killed. How long until they find us? Depends on how hard they look. If I'm just another burned asset, maybe a few weeks. If they decide I'm a serious threat? She trailed off. Could be days. Joe thought about that. Thought about living the rest of his life looking over his shoulder, wondering if every stranger was a threat. It should have terrified him. Instead, he just felt determined. Then we better keep moving, he said. They drove south through Mexico, sticking to back roads when possible, stopping only for gas and food. Tanya taught Joe how to spot surveillance, how to vary their route, how to think like someone who was being hunted. Never use credit cards, she explained as they sat in a taco stand in Hermosillo. Cash only. Never stay in the same place 2 nights in a row. Never establish patterns. Never trust anyone you don't have to. Sounds like a lonely way to live. It is. She reached across the table and took his hand. But less lonely with you. That night they stayed at a small motel outside Guaymas. 2 rooms, just to be safe. But after an hour of staring at the ceiling, Joe knocked on the connecting door. Tanya opened it, wearing a t-shirt and jeans, her hair down for the first time since he'd met her. She looked younger, more vulnerable. Can't sleep either? She asked. Keep thinking about what comes next, what we're going to do, how we're going to survive this. Wanna come in? They sat on her bed, backs against the headboard, shoulders touching. The TV was on but muted, casting flickering light across the room. Tell me something about yourself, Joe said. Something real. Something you've never told anyone. Tanya was quiet for a long moment. When I was 12, I wanted to be a dancer. Ballet. I was actually pretty good. My teacher said I had potential, that if I worked hard, I could maybe dance professionally. She smiled at the memory. Then my mom got sick, cancer. We needed money for treatment. I got a job after school, gave up dancing. It didn't matter anyway. She died 2 years later. I'm sorry. After she died, I was angry at everything, at her for leaving, at my dad for dying when I was 6, at the world for being so unfair. I got into fights, skipped school, ran with a bad crowd. She pulled her knees up to her chest. Then a recruiter from the agency found me, saw something in me, offered me a way out, a way to channel all that anger into something useful. I was 18, angry, lost, so I said yes. And they trained you to kill people. They trained me to serve my country, to protect people, to do the hard things no one else wanted to do. She looked at him. At least that's what they told me. And for a long time I believed it, believed I was making a difference, that every target I eliminated was one less threat in the world. What changed? I don't know. It wasn't one thing, it was gradual, mission after mission, year after year, until one day I woke up and realized I couldn't remember the last time I'd felt anything. Joy, sadness, anger, it was all just gone. I was empty, a ghost. She leaned her head on his shoulder. Until you made me feel again, even if it's terrifying. Joe wrapped his arm around her. You're not a ghost. You're the most alive person I've ever met. I've killed 23 people, Joe. 23. I remember every name, every face. I carry them with me. I know, and I'm not going to tell you that's okay, or that you shouldn't feel guilty, or that it doesn't matter. It does matter. Those lives mattered. He turned to look at her. But you matter too. And you don't have to keep being the person they made you. You get to choose who you are from here on out. Tanya's eyes filled with tears. What if I can't? What if this is all I am? Then we figure it out together. One day at a time, one choice at a time. He kissed her forehead. You're not alone anymore, Tanya. You don't have to carry it all by yourself. She kissed him then, desperate and grateful and full of need. Joe kissed her back, and they fell onto the bed, tangled together, finding comfort and connection in each other's arms. Later, as Tanya slept beside him, Joe stared at the ceiling and thought about the path ahead. He knew it wouldn't be easy. Knew there would be moments when they'd question this decision, when the price would feel too high. But looking at Tanya's face in the dim light, peaceful for the first time since he'd met her, Joe knew he'd made the right choice. Whatever came next, they'd face it together. 3 days later, they reached Guadalajara. Tanya's contact, a grizzled man named Marcus who'd lost an eye and most of his illusions somewhere in Afghanistan, met them at a cafe in the historic district. You look like hell, Rodriguez, he said by way of greeting. You look worse. Marcus laughed and shook Joe's hand. So this is the guy worth burning your entire career for. Must be something special. He is, Tanya said simply. They talked for an hour. Marcus explained the process for creating new identities, the cost, the time it would take. He also warned them about the agency's reach. They're already looking for you, he said. Checked with some old contacts. Word is you're classified as a high-value defector. They've got teams working Mexico, watching borders, monitoring known associates. How long do we have? Tanya asked. Days, maybe. Maybe less if you get unlucky. Marcus leaned forward. You need to get out of North America entirely. South America, Asia, Europe, somewhere you can blend in where they won't expect you to go. I need to release the evidence first, make sure they have a reason to leave us alone. That's going to paint a target on your back the size of Texas. It's already there. At least this way I have leverage. Marcus nodded slowly. Okay, I can help with that too. Got a journalist contact in Brazil, someone who's not afraid of the agency. You give me the files, I'll make sure they get published. Attribution will be anonymous, untraceable to you. Tanya pulled a USB drive from her pocket. Everything's on here. Encrypted, the password is? Don't tell me. Write it down, sealed envelope. That way if they grab me, I can't tell them, even if I want to. Smart. Joe was starting to understand why Tanya trusted this man. They spent the next 2 days in Guadalajara while Marcus worked on their documents. Joe and Tanya stayed in a small apartment Marcus provided, venturing out only when necessary. It felt like playing house, like pretending to be normal. They cooked simple meals together, watched Mexican TV. Joe couldn't understand. Made love like it might be the last time. Where do you want to go? Tanya asked one evening as they sat on the small balcony watching the sun set over the city. After we leave here, where in the world sounds good to you? Joe thought about it. I've always wanted to see Argentina, the mountains, the wine country, and I hear they have amazing woodworkers there. I could learn new techniques. Argentina, Tanya smiled. I like that. We could get a small place in the countryside. You could build furniture. I don't know, figure out who I am when I'm not working for the agency. You could dance again. She looked at him surprised. Dance? You said you wanted to be a dancer. Maybe it's not too late. I'm 31 years old, Joe. Way too old to be a professional dancer. So don't do it professionally. Do it because it makes you happy. Do it because you can. He took her hand. We're starting over, right? Clean slate. You get to be whoever you want to be. Tanya leaned her head on his shoulder. I want to be the kind of person who deserves you. You already are. You barely know me. I know enough, and I'm looking forward to learning the rest. On the third day, Marcus returned with new passports, driver's licenses, and birth certificates. Joe was now James Sullivan, a freelance contractor from Canada. Tanya was now Sarah Sullivan, his wife, a graphic designer. The documents will hold up to most scrutiny, Marcus said. But don't push your luck. Don't try to fly internationally for at least 6 months. Stay under the radar. What about the evidence? Tanya asked. Being verified by my contact in Brazil, as we speak. Should hit the news cycle within 72 hours. Major publications, multiple countries. Once it's out there, the agency will be too busy dealing with the fallout to focus all their resources on hunting you. Thank you, Marcus. Don't thank me yet. You've still got to survive long enough for it to matter. He looked at Joe. You take care of her. She's one of the good ones, even if she doesn't believe it herself. I will. And Rodriguez? Try to stay alive. Would be nice to know someone made it out of this life with something to show for it besides scars and nightmares. They left Guadalajara that evening, driving south through the night. Marcus had arranged passage on a cargo ship leaving Acapulco for Panama. From there, they'd make their way further south. As they drove, Joe's phone buzzed. He'd kept it off, battery removed since they'd left Crescent City. But he'd turned it on briefly to send a message to Maria, just a text saying he was okay, that he'd explain someday, that he loved her. Now it buzzed with her response. I don't know what you're doing or why, but I know you. You're following your heart. I hope she's worth it. I hope you're happy. I love you. Be safe. Joe felt tears prick his eyes. He showed the message to Tanya. She read it and squeezed his hand. I'm going to do everything I can to be worth it, she said quietly. You already are. They reached Acapulco at dawn. The cargo ship was exactly as advertised. Old, rusty, and willing to take passengers who didn't ask questions and didn't expect comfort. The captain, a weathered Mexican man who'd clearly made his fortune asking no questions, showed them to a tiny cabin below deck. 6 days to Panama, he said. Food twice a day. Stay out of the way of the crew. We don't see you, you don't see us. Understood? Understood, Tanya said, handing him an envelope of cash. The captain counted it, nodded, and left them alone. Joe looked around the cramped cabin. One narrow bed. A single porthole. Bare metal walls. Well, this is cozy. Tanya laughed. A real, genuine laugh that made Joe's heart sing. We've stayed in worse. We've literally only stayed in one motel and Marcus's apartment. Still, could be worse. She wrapped her arms around him. Could be doing this alone. The ship's engines rumbled to life. Joe felt the floor shift beneath them as they pulled away from the dock. They were really doing this. Really leaving everything behind. Really betting their lives on each other and hope and the possibility that somewhere in the world they could find peace. Joe kissed Tanya as the ship carried them out to sea, toward Panama, toward Argentina, toward a future they'd build together from scratch. Behind them, in offices across Virginia and Mexico and a dozen other locations, the hunt continued. Teams deployed, leads pursued. The machinery of a powerful organization focused on finding 2 people who dared to walk away. But for 6 days on a cargo ship crossing the Pacific, Joe and Tanya were invisible. Just 2 people in love, sailing toward tomorrow. And for now, that was enough.